There are 5 basic elements of landscape design. These are color, form, texture, mass, and line. Of these, mass, form, and line are sort of the core or provide the backbone of design, and we use these to organize space. Color and texture add a little bit of finesse. They're used to add richness and depth and a little bit of excitement to that basic design. We use these basic elements of design to guide us in selecting plants, in selecting hardscape elements, and also in organizing the space of the design. But today I'm going to join Patrick Bones, lead designer for Brighton Landscape. Patrick is a member of the Oklahoma Nursery and Landscape Association and currently the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the Association for Professional Landscape Designers. Thank you for joining me today, Patrick.
Pleasure, Kim.
Well, the thing I want to achieve with you here today, I want to look at the landscape from a designer's standpoint.
Okay, we can do that.
And hopefully we can look at some of these elements of design as we go along.
Okay,
and
sure.
I thought a great place to start was right here at the entryway to the garden.
Actually, it's a doorway to the garden. The arch and the gate.
Yeah, and as you look through the gateway, our eye is immediately captured here.
Right, you see the blue water feature, the blue vase. And also a focal point is the fountain out in the rose garden. And you can also see the angel statue over to your right. So you're drawn to these focal points. It makes you want to enter the garden to see more.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people will think of having one focal point, but here we have several in different spaces, and it really seems to work very well.
You can do it either way. Sometimes it's really nice to have one major focal point, but then again you can have several, as long as you don't overdo it. And as we enter this garden, which is called a formal garden, you have the trellis or the archway here covered with the roses. It's kind of another doorway. You come in the garden with one doorway, then you come into this separate garden room with another doorway. And as you look around, you can again see the angel statue and the fountain, and then you see a bench over here surrounded by a couple of pots.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about line and direction. We have this curving line, and it kind of just leads our eye right
Exactly.
around here.
Curving lines almost speak to you and say, follow me, or look at this. Your eye just travels with those curving lines and goes around, draws your eye both directions.
Well, as we move around the curve here, we're brought over to another focal point, the bench, and also perhaps a little bit invited to come and sit down and relax.
And whether you sit or not, it's a focal point. It draws you out to this part of the garden. Many times people just go out and look at the bench. They don't even sit, but still it's some place for your eye to arrive. And then over here you can see a pathway that's in the garden. It kind of invites you to go further into the garden to see what else is happening in the garden.
A lot of time we'll see that, a pathway, and especially they curve. They tend to curve and you don't see what's at the other end, so you're immediately drawn over there. What's beyond that curve?
And hopefully someone has placed items where as you come around a curve, there's something to draw your eye at the end of that pathway. Like here we have a pot that's ahead.
Now, some of these focal points are visible from multiple places in the garden.
This is true.
As we move through it.
If you can plan for that, it's wonderful. If you can see a focal point from 2 or 3 different points of view in the garden, it's really surprising, intriguing, and satisfying to see that.
And we can see here the angel statue. We saw that from the entryway.
That's true.
Well, now we're in a different area of the garden, but it's still another
There's an
focal
opening
point.
between a couple of evergreen shrubs there, and you can see the angel statue.
And also from the patio area.
That's
so
true.
Really getting the most out of this.
Kim, here's another line we can take a look at. It's a limestone border on the garden, and you can see it's curved, and it speaks to you again, it's motion and action instead of being straight and static, like rectilinear. So it talks to you again and says, follow me or walk this direction.
Yeah. Now, in addition to using lines in the garden to direct your eye, we can also use plant form. That's another important aspect of design.
It's true.
And there's several different forms out here just to demonstrate. Right next to us we have a column shape, and that kind of brings your eye up.
That's true.
Adds a little bit of height. What are some of the other
Well, there's a vase shape, like the Japanese maple is a vase shape.
We get a lot of rounded plant forms.
It's a Yopon holly.
Yopon holly.
A lot of times it matters the way they're maintained, the way they're cut.
That's true.
That changes the form.
You're creating more of a rounded form with pruning.
That's true.
Whereas it might grow a little more naturally.
Which is good. Natural is good. It just depends on what your taste is.
Okay. And just a few other shapes and plant forms. We have a lot of weeping plants that add just a different character. And of course our ground covers, we have that lateral.
Horizontal growth, yeah. And there's pyramidal shaped as well.
Like a spruce or.
That's true. Yeah.
Another design element that we can consider in landscaping is texture, and that would be the relative size of parts, plant parts. For example, the fine leaves on the maple and the larger coarse leaves here. So we have a fine texture and a coarse texture. We also see that in other parts of the landscape, is that right?
Yes, we do. Not only in foliage and leaf forms, but you can see it also in hardscape materials as well. Like there may be brick, there may be patterned concrete, there can be surface limestone border, and then pebbles of all sizes and shapes and colors. We use them all, not only plant material and texture differences, but also hardscape differences and textures.
Now when you're designing a landscape, how do you work with texture?
Well, when you're learning design, you really pay very close attention to texture differences, combinations as well as contrasts, but it almost becomes a subconscious type thing whenever you've been doing design for a number of years. And now I find that I just subconsciously use different textures and different colors as well, not only leaf size and texture of the leaf, but also color combinations. They're either contrasting or they're complementary. And you just get used to using those and naturally use them in your designs.
So when you're combining different textures, you want a sharp contrast between the fine and the coarse.
That's true. If you can do that, but it's always good to remember that you can always overdo anything that's good.
Okay.
So, right.
That's a good point to remember.
Yeah, that's true.
Before we go and look at some of the other gardens you've worked in, this garden you've done a really good job organizing the space and creating different rooms, and I thought maybe we could talk about that and walk through some of these.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Well, this area right here by the gate is really used as an entry area, you know, just like the entry to a home, inside of a home.
It's very welcoming for sure with the fountain
Exactly.
here.
Yes, thank you. And then you have, again, a passageway or an entry into another garden room, which I just happen to call this the formal garden room. It's got some roses and a formal fountain in the middle. And then hidden over here in the corner of the yard is a potting area or a service area for the homeowner where they can do all of their potting up of their plants or whatever.
Okay. And as we move from one room to the next, sometimes you have a portal, sometimes it's just a path that brings us into that next room.
That's true. I really like to use gates or arbors or arches or something when you go from room to room, because it really sets you up for something different and something new. And Kim, this is another room that we created for the homeowner. It's around their swimming pool. It's a very high usage area. It's beginning to transpose into a tropical area around their swimming pool.
Which really fits kind of the tropical mood with the pool.
Fits what they do and what they enjoy. Then we have another area here. You can see the evergreens as we walk into another area. And this is another highly used area, but it's an open lawn area for the children and for the pets that they have. You almost always have to have an area like this in someone's yard.
Well, an open space is also important in a design as well, isn't
That is
it?
true. If you have way too much garden and no open space, it's just overdone. It doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right. You're right. And here we have an entryway into another area of the garden or of the yard, and it's actually called a secret garden. It's separate from the rest of the yard, hidden behind the garden gate and the arborvitaes and the evergreen. And this is the area where I say is the fun part of the yard. It's a perennial garden. The homeowner likes to buy all kinds of plants and experiment with them here. It's a lot of fun.
And it's nice to have an area in the garden where you can experiment with different plants and try new things.
Definitely. The point is, if you can't have fun gardening, what's the point, right?
It's true. Well, let's take a look at some of the other gardens that you've worked in.
Okay, great.
Well, we talked about line earlier, and here you've used line in a little bit different way. Can you just kind of explain how this was laid out?
Sure. It's actually, I was hired to design this landscape for people. This is a brand new home that they built, and by interviewing the people, I knew that they liked contemporary. This is a contemporary home, and the house is being placed on the lot at a 45-degree angle instead of straight like most houses. So I played off that 45-degree angle. And as you can see, the garden beds and score lines on the driveway have been laid out at a 45-degree angle. And it actually has created a lot more interest, I think, in the landscape than if things would have just been straight out from the house to the street.
Absolutely. And one of those things I found real interesting was just this holly hedge you have. Normally, if you're looking from the street, it would be straight, but when you look at it, it's at that 45-degree angle. A little bit different, but it works really well.
It does for them. They not only like contemporary, but they also told me that they like a natural feel to their garden bed, so I tried to combine the two, the straight rectilinear lines and then the curved lines as well. But you can see the lines of the hedges actually match up with the lines of the home. So actually, when I sat down to draw, I just actually drew lines out from the home the way it was laid out on the lot.
And then built off of that?
Right, it actually makes it easy if you'll just pay attention to that.
Okay. You've also continued that combination of the natural and curved lines with these more linear angles in the back. Why don't we take a look at some of those?
Okay, let's do.
Well, in the backyard here, you have a very interesting combination of the formal and the natural taking place, with this nice natural stone walkway.
Okay, thanks, Kim. I'll show you, for instance, the natural boulders right here, and then it's a curvilinear line for this garden here. But then inside the garden, I've got the triangle, and again, I'm working off that 45-degree element right there. And then opposing to the curvilinear garden bed, I've got some other triangular beds over on the opposite side that I've got ground cover and magnolias planted in. So I think it is a nice combination of contemporary or rectilinear as well as the natural element and the curved lines. Seems to work.
It sure does. It's a little bit unusual, but it fits together in such a very nice way.
It does, thanks.
Well, you're welcome, Pat. Now there's one more element of design that I wanted to look at with you, and that's mass.
Okay.
Well, earlier we were talking about plant form, and I thought this was a good example to point out the difference between the form of an individual plant and that of a group planting. When you have just one plant, it has its own form. This is a column, but when you put a bunch of them together like this, you have a screen, and you could achieve this same screen whether the plants were a column or a pyramid or a rounded bush.
That's true, Kim. And one thing to remember is when you do plant several shrubs together like this to make a screen, it really matters on how you keep these shrubs trimmed. You can trim them a lot of different ways. You can round them like these have been rounded. They could be sharp pointed, pyramidal shaped, or whatever. It's just important to keep in mind the use of these. Are they being used as a screen for privacy or what they're being used for?
Okay. Now we came here really to talk about mass, and to me that can be somewhat of a difficult topic to understand.
It can be. Another way to look at it is like occupied space or unoccupied space or empty space. One of the most important things in a landscape is empty space, and that would include, say, a large lawn area, something that's open, versus, say, shrubs or foundation plantings up by a home.
Okay, and when we think of mass, I think there's two different ways to think about it. There's individual mass, again, kind of like the individual shape. We have plants that have a very large mass, like this maple tree.
That's true.
For example.
That's true. And then a lot of times in our designs, we create masses of certain plants. Like, for instance, these hollies here we've planted those for a screen, and it's actually a mass of Foster's hollies. We've used them on purpose to create this privacy screen for the homeowner. You can do individuals, but it works much better in this formal yard to use masses of the same type plant.
And we'll also see mass planting of color a lot as
That's
well,
true.
with some perennials or bulbs.
That's true. In seasonal colors, say in a yard like this, we would use masses of the same color to make a nice statement, really catch people's eye.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much today for joining us, Patrick, and for helping me explain some of these
Thank
elements
you.
of
It's
design.
been my pleasure, Kim. It's good to see you
Excellent.
again. Thank you.
Thanks.